60,000 shells a day. That was Russian artillery output by the summer of 2022, fed by ammunition depots staged just behind the front lines. Ukraine's Air Force, outnumbered nearly 10-1 and boxed in by layered S-300 and S-400 coverage, had no safe way to strike back. Then in June, just 4 HIMARS launchers arrived, and Russia's entire logistics network began to unravel. By the outbreak of full-scale war in February 2022, Ukraine's Air Force faced a numerical and technological chasm. Only about 116 operational combat aircraft, MiG-29s, Su-27s, Su-24s, and Su-25s, stood against a Russian fleet of over 1,000 warplanes. The imbalance was not just on paper. Russian S-300 and S-400 air defense batteries formed overlapping shields that stretched 20 to 40 kilometers behind the front, creating a lethal no-fly zone for Ukrainian jets. Any attempt to strike deep, beyond 30 kilometers, meant entering a kill envelope where surface-to-air missiles could be launched within seconds. Pilots who tried risked not only their aircraft, but their lives, and most were forced to operate close to the front, far from the Russian ammunition depots that kept Moscow's artillery supplied. On the ground, Ukraine's own artillery faced its own limits. Soviet-era 122mm and 152mm howitzers maxed out at 25 to 30 kilometers, while the Russian supply nodes were dug in well beyond that range. The result was a protected logistics chain that let Russian gunners unleash up to 60,000 shells per day at the height of the Donbas fighting, 10 times Ukraine's daily output. Ukrainian forces could see the depots on satellite imagery, but had no way to reliably destroy them. The Air Force was boxed in by radar and missiles, and artillery simply could not reach. Each day, Russian shells poured forward, supplied by depots that seemed untouchable. The question hung in the air: how do you break a logistics system you cannot hit without losing your own Air Force in the process? June 2022 brought a new weapon to Ukrainian hands. The first M142 High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, HIMARS, arrived under a U.S. aid package. 6 launchers came in the initial convoy, each capable of firing 6 guided multiple launch rocket system rockets, called GMLRS, with a range of up to 80 kilometers and global positioning system based accuracy measured in meters. This was not just another artillery piece. The entire 6 rocket load could be fired in less than a minute, and the vehicle could be moving again within 2 to 3 minutes, a doctrine known as shoot and scoot. Mobility was central to the system's survival. Mounted on a 6x6 truck chassis, HIMARS could reach speeds up to 80 kilometers per hour and relocate rapidly across paved or unpaved roads. This agility allowed Ukrainian crews to evade Russian counter-battery radars, which typically needed 2 to 3 minutes to generate a firing solution. A senior U.S. official, briefing reporters in November 2022, stated that not a single HIMARS launcher had been destroyed in the first 5 months of combat, an extraordinary record given the intensity of Russian efforts to hunt them down. Each pod of rockets arrived sealed and ready to fire, minimizing the need for lengthy reloads in exposed positions. Crews could reload a fresh pod in less than an hour and resume operations. The GMLRS rockets delivered high explosive warheads with a circular error probable as low as 5 meters, enabling strikes on ammunition depots, command posts, and bridges that had previously been unreachable. With this combination of range, survivability, and accuracy, HIMARS offered Ukraine a way to attack Russian logistics nodes deep behind the front, without risking aircraft or pilots to dense air defense coverage. For the first time, the protected Russian rear was within reach from the ground. Within weeks of HIMARS entering the fight, Russian ammunition depots that had stood untouched for months began erupting in succession. Geolocated strike data from July 2022 confirms more than 50 Russian storage sites destroyed across occupied territories, from Kherson to Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. The scale of the losses was unprecedented. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov publicly credited HIMARS with eliminating tens of thousands of artillery shells and as many as 20 million small arms rounds in these early strikes. Russian forces, accustomed to operating with near unlimited ammunition, suddenly faced supply shocks that rippled down their entire logistics chain. Satellite imagery and open-source analysts tracked the aftermath, cratered storage yards, burning railheads, and convoys forced to reroute hundreds of kilometers to reach safer depots. The Institute for the Study of War noted a marked slowdown in Russian artillery fire, at times dropping from 60,000 shells per day to less than half that volume in sectors where depot attrition was heaviest. Moscow's own response was telling. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu ordered Russian commanders to prioritize the detection and destruction of HIMARS launchers, acknowledging the system as a top operational threat. Yet a senior U.S. official stated in November 2022 that not a single HIMARS had been destroyed in the first 5 months of combat, underscoring the effectiveness of the system's rapid relocation tactics. The HIMARS campaign forced a fundamental change in Russian logistics. Ammunition stocks were pushed farther from the front, convoys grew longer and more vulnerable, and the tempo of Russian artillery fire began to falter. The protected rear that had fueled Moscow's offensive was now exposed, and the consequences would soon extend beyond depots to the bridges and corridors that held the entire supply network together. HIMARS reached its operational peak during the Kherson campaign, where Ukrainian forces set out to sever Russia's critical supply arteries across the Dnipro River. Over a 37-hour window, in August 2022, Ukrainian artillery units coordinated a sustained HIMARS bombardment that struck approximately 120 targets, including the Antonivsky Road and rail bridges, the Daryevsky crossing, and the Kakhovka Dam Road. Satellite imagery from Planet Labs and Maxar captured the progressive damage. Precise rocket impacts carved gaps along the bridge decks, rendering them unusable for heavy vehicles while leaving the main structures standing. Ukrainian spokespeople emphasized that this approach was deliberate, disabling military logistics without destroying civilian infrastructure outright. Russian engineers scrambled to construct pontoon bridges and launch barge ferries, but these too fell within the HIMARS engagement envelope. Each attempt to restore crossings was met with renewed rocket fire, forcing supply convoys to reroute or halt. By late August, Russian units west of the Dnipro, estimated at nearly 20,000 troops, found themselves effectively isolated. Ammunition and fuel stocks dwindled as resupply became impossible. The Institute for the Study of War credited this interdiction campaign as decisive, stating that liberation of Kherson would not have been possible without the precision and persistence of HIMARS strikes. The operational payoff became clear on November 11, 2022, when Russian forces withdrew from Kherson City. The HIMARS-enabled severing of bridge links had transformed the Dnipro into a barrier, stranding Russian mechanized units and breaking the logistical backbone that had fueled their advance. The Kherson campaign demonstrated, in concrete terms, how ground-based precision fires could deliver effects that Ukraine's Air Force, constrained by Russian air defenses, could not hope to achieve. On January 1, 2023, a HIMARS strike shattered a Russian troop concentration in Donetsk, igniting an ammunition depot and producing one of the highest single-event casualty counts of the war. Moscow's own figures confirmed at least 89 soldiers killed, while independent monitors placed the toll at 139 or more. This deep strike operation underscored the system's reach, a target well behind the front, unreachable by Ukrainian aircraft without prohibitive risk, was destroyed by ground-launched precision rockets. The pattern continued into 2024, as United States policy shifted to allow HIMARS strikes inside Russian territory. In June 2024, a formal diplomatic note authorized Ukrainian forces to target air defense launchers and radar stations just across the border near Kharkiv. Within days, Ukrainian GMLRS rockets struck Russian batteries that had previously sheltered behind the old restrictions, expanding the scope of interdiction beyond what the Air Force could ever attempt under the shadow of S-300 and S-400 coverage. Ukrainian pilots faced a dilemma their aircraft could not solve. The Air Force's mainstays, MiG-29s, Su-27s, Su-24s, and Su-25s, were forced to operate at low altitude and close to the front, hemmed in by Russian S-300 and S-400 air defense systems that created a deep, overlapping kill zone. Attempts to strike targets beyond 30 kilometers meant entering a lethal envelope where survival was far from guaranteed. Aircraft losses mounted, with open-source estimates indicating nearly a third of Ukraine's fixed-wing fleet lost to combat and accidents by 2024. Even as Western F-16s began arriving in mid-2024, only a handful were operational, and pilot retraining lagged behind. These jets, equipped with standard air-to-ground munitions, could not safely deliver precision strikes at the 70 to 80 kilometer ranges needed to hit Russian depots. The result was a persistent gap. Ukraine's Air Force lacked the survivable reach and volume to disrupt Russian logistics deep behind the line, a gap HIMARS would fill from the ground. Combat results in Ukraine set off a global scramble for HIMARS. Lockheed Martin doubled its annual output to 96 launchers by the end of 2024, scaling up from the pre-war rate of 48. By November 2025, the 750th launcher rolled off the Camden, Arkansas line. Demand surged as battlefield data spread. More than 20 countries placed orders or entered negotiations. Poland signed a contract for 486 launchers, the largest single artillery procurement of its kind, with a reported value near $4.5 billion. From 2024 to 2026, cumulative HIMARS-related contracts exceeded $9 billion. Factory upgrades added automation and in new integration lines to keep pace with orders, while monthly GMLRS rocket production jumped by 40% to over 1,100 rounds. The system's proven effectiveness in Ukraine reshaped not only artillery doctrine, but also the global arms market, turning a once specialized launcher into a central pillar of modern ground forces. Today, the HIMARS remains a symbol of how ground-launched precision can overcome dense air defenses, forcing Moscow to admit casualties and redraw its supply lines. As Ukraine and its allies adapt to evolving threats, the lesson endures. Operational innovation, not just firepower, shapes the battlefield's future. Share your perspective below.